"Hey, Grandpa, you need a hand with that museum piece, or are you just polishing it for another 50 years? The voice, dripping with the casual arrogance of youth, sliced through the quiet diligence of the hangar. George Patton, 87 years old, didn't flinch. His hand, gnarled but steady, continued its slow, circular motion, wiping a nearly invisible smudge from the silver fuselage of the P-51 Mustang. He could feel their eyes on his back, a mixture of amusement and impatience. There were 3 of them, young airmen in their crisp fatigues, posturing near the massive hangar door. One of them, a senior airman with his name Torres, stitched above his pocket, stepped forward. "I'm serious, old-timer. You got a work order for this. This is a restricted area." George finished his circular wipe, his gaze fixed on the reflection in the polished aluminum. He could see the distorted figures of the young men behind him, and beyond them the blue sky of a peaceful afternoon. He remained silent. His silence seemed to needle them, to challenge their assumed authority. It was a silence born not of weakness but of a patience they couldn't possibly comprehend. The second airman chimed in, nudging his friend. "My grandpa has one of these in a plastic model kit. Maybe you should start there, Pop. Less chance of you breaking something." A low chuckle rippled between them. Torres took another step, his boots echoing on the smooth concrete floor. The hangar was cavernous, a cathedral of aviation, and their voices seemed to profane the hallowed space. In the stalls around them sat the sleek, gray predators of the modern Air Force, F-22s and F-35s, but here in Bay 4 was this relic, this ghost of a bygone war. Valiant Lady, the name was painted in elegant curling script just below the cockpit. She was George's plane. Not his in title, perhaps. She belonged to a private collector who paid the base a hefty sum for hangar space and restoration access, but his in soul. He had bled in her. He had prayed in her. He had watched friends die from her cockpit. "I asked you a question," Torres pressed, his tone hardening. "I need to see your base credentials." Now, slowly, deliberately, George straightened his back. The movement was stiff, accompanied by a soft groan of protesting joints. He turned to face them, his eyes, pale blue and clouded with age, holding a depth that made the young airman unconsciously take a half-step back. There was no anger in his expression, only a profound weariness. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn brown leather jacket, the same one he'd worn for 40 years. The airmen exchanged glances, their smirks returning. This was the part of the show they enjoyed, the bumbling old man fumbling for his papers. The confrontation had drawn a small audience. A few other mechanics, taking a break from the complexities of fifth-generation fighters, leaned against tool chests, watching the drama unfold. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. But here, around the Mustang, there was another scent: old leather, oil, and something else. History. Torres was the alpha of his small pack, puffed up with the certainty of his rank and youth. He saw an old man, frail and out of place. He saw a nuisance. He couldn't see the ghost of the 20-year-old pilot who lived behind those tired eyes. He couldn't hear the thunder of 1,000 Merlin engines roaring in the old man's memory. "Come on, we don't have all day," Torres said, snapping his fingers. George's hand emerged from his jacket, holding a simple, laminated civilian ID card. Torres snatched it from his grasp, glancing at it with theatrical disdain. "George Patton. Cute. Your parents have a sense of humor." "That's his name," a new voice said. It was calm, level, and carried an authority that the airman's shouting lacked. Lieutenant Evans, a young officer barely a year out of the academy, had walked into the hangar. He'd been on his way to a pre-flight briefing when he saw the cluster of airmen bothering the old man. Something in their body language, the predatory circling, the dismissive gestures, set his teeth on edge. Torres, momentarily flustered by the presence of an officer, straightened up. "Sir, this man was in a restricted area without a proper escort or work order." "He has clearance," Evans said, his eyes not on Torres but on the P-51. "The wing commander himself approved it. This aircraft is a part of the Heritage Flight Program." He had read the memo. He was a history buff, and the presence of a genuine combat-flown P-51 on his base was a source of private excitement. The airman deflated slightly, but Torres wasn't ready to give up his power play. He was still holding George's ID. "Well, he should have said something, sir. And he should have his credentials visible." His gaze fell back to George, who was now reaching into his jacket again, this time for his wallet to put his ID away. "What else you got in there, Grandpa?" Torres said, his bravado returning. "AARP card. Pictures of the grandkids." In a swift, shockingly disrespectful move, he reached out and plucked the worn leather wallet from George's hand before he could secure it. It was a step too far. The other mechanics shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Evans's jaw tightened. Torres flipped the wallet open, A small, creased black and white photograph fluttered to the concrete floor. It showed a group of impossibly young men in flight gear, grinning in front of this very same P-51. Torres scoffed. "Look at this. From the Stone Age." He rummaged through the wallet's pockets, his fingers clumsy and intrusive. And then he saw it. Tucked into a hidden flap of worn leather was a small tarnished silver pin. It was a pair of wings, but they were different from the standard issue ones he was used to seeing. They were heavier, more ornate, with a star set in the center. Combat pilot wings. As Torres's profane fingers touched the pin, the sterile quiet of the hangar vanished from George's mind. He was no longer an old man being humiliated. For a fraction of a second, the world dissolved into a flash of violent memory. The percussive roar of the Mustang's engine filled his ears. So loud it was a physical pressure. The sky outside his canopy wasn't blue, but a dirty, smoke-filled gray, pockmarked with the black puffs of flak. The air reeked of cordite. He could feel the familiar violent rattle of the .50 caliber machine guns firing in their mounts, the vibration running through the stick, up his arm and into his very bones. A Focke-Wulf 190, trailing black smoke, tumbled past his wing. The memory was less than a heartbeat, a visceral echo of a life lived at the edge of death, and then it was gone. He was back in the silent hangar, the scent of jet fuel once again replacing the cordite. He looked at the young man holding his past in his hands, and felt nothing but a vast hollow pity. Lieutenant Evans saw the whole thing. He saw the wallet snatched, the photo fall, the airman sneer. He saw the flicker in the old man's eyes, a momentary fire that was almost frightening in its intensity before it subsided back into that unnerving calm. He knew he was witnessing something profoundly wrong. The name on the ID, Patton, clicked with the name of the plane, Valiant Lady. His mind raced, connecting dots from articles and history books he'd devoured. It couldn't be. Could it? Torres, oblivious, was holding the wallet up like a trophy. "All right, that's it. You've had your chance," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling security forces. We'll have you trespassed from the base. Maybe they'll recommend a nice psych evaluation to see if you're fit to be wandering around an active airfield." He was looking at George, but he was playing to the audience, to his friends, to the officer he wanted to impress with his diligence. He was savoring the humiliation, pushing it to its absolute peak. As Torres began to dial, Lieutenant Evans took a step back into the shadows of a massive F-22 wing. He pulled out his own phone. He wasn't calling security. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed the number for the wing command post, the nerve center of the entire base. "This is Lieutenant Evans in Hangar 4, he said, his voice low but urgent. "I have a situation here. There is an elderly civilian." "Yes, sir." The man restoring the P-51 Mustang. He paused, listening. "His name is George Patton." He spelled it out. P-A-T-T-O-N. "He is currently being detained by Senior Airman Torres." Evans chose his words carefully. "Sir, I believe you need to get the wing commander, immediately." The voice on the other end, initially bored and bureaucratic, changed instantly. There was a muffled shout, the sound of a chair scraping back violently. The audience couldn't hear the words, but the sudden shift in tone was unmistakable. Help was not just on the way. The cavalry had been scrambled. Inside the wing command building, Colonel Marcus Davis was on the phone, his face a storm cloud of annoyance. An unscheduled call from the command post about a hangar dispute was the last thing he needed. "What is it, Lieutenant?" he said, his voice clipped. "Sir, it's about the civilian in Hangar 4, Evans said. "The one with the Mustang. His name is George Patton." The name hung in the air for a second. Colonel Davis's entire posture changed. He went from leaning back in his leather chair to sitting bolt upright, his knuckles white on the receiver. His eyes darted to a framed print on his office wall, a painting of P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group locked in a dogfight over Germany. "Say that name again, Lieutenant," the colonel commanded, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Patton, sir. George Patton." Colonel Davis slammed the phone down, not into its cradle but onto the desk. "Sergeant," he roared at his aide, "get my car, now, and get Dr. Albright from the base historian's office on the line. Tell him to meet me at Hangar 4 on the double." The aide, a young staff sergeant, scrambled to comply, startled by the raw urgency in his commander's voice. "Sir, is everything all right?" Davis was already shrugging on his service coat, his movements sharp and precise. "Do you have any idea who that is?" he said, his voice a low growl of disbelief and fury. "That's not just a George Patton. That's the George Patton. They called him the Ghost of Bastogne. We have a living Medal of Honor recipient on our base, and my airmen are—" He trailed off, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. God help them. The audience in the colonel's office was just his aide, but the implication was clear. A line had been crossed that they didn't even know existed. Back in Hangar 4, Senior Airman Torres was basking in the final moments of his authority. Lieutenant Evans had retreated, and the old man was just standing there, a silent statue of defiance. Torres had his phone to his ear, a fake conversation for effect. "Yes, this is Senior Airman Torres. I have an unauthorized civilian in Hangar 4 who is refusing to cooperate." He was spinning his tail, painting himself as the diligent guardian of base security, requesting a patrol to escort him off the premises. Possible mental confusion. It was a vile performance, a final arrogant overreach from which there would be no recovery. He was so wrapped up in his own drama that he didn't hear it at first. The faint, distant sound of a siren. But it wasn't a single siren. It was a chorus. The sound grew exponentially, screaming closer. A black staff car, lights flashing but siren now silent, skidded to a halt just outside the massive bay doors blocking the afternoon sun. It was followed immediately by a security forces truck and a white command van. The ordinary rhythm of the base had just been shattered. The hangar went dead silent. The mechanic stopped leaning and stood at attention. Torres froze, his phone still held to his ear, his mouth slightly agape. The doors of the black car burst open. Colonel Davis emerged, his uniform immaculate, his face a mask of controlled thunder. He was followed by a Chief Master Sergeant, the highest-ranking enlisted man on the base, and a harried-looking civilian clutching a tablet, Dr. Albright, the base historian. They didn't walk. They marched. Their footsteps echoed with a purpose that sucked all the air out of the vast space. They strode past the petrified airmen as if they were invisible, their focus entirely on the old man standing beside the vintage fighter plane. Colonel Davis came to a halt 3 paces in front of George Patton. In the echoing silence, he planted his feet, brought his heels together, and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his entire career. His hand was a blade, quivering with intensity, his eyes locked on George's. "Mr. Patton," the colonel's voice boomed, resonating through the hangar. "It is an absolute honor to have you on my base, sir." George, who had watched the procession with a calm, knowing expression, slowly raised a hand in a frail ghost of a salute. It was less a military gesture and more a simple acknowledgement, man to man. The colonel held his salute, his arm ramrod straight. He turned his head just enough to fix Senior Airman Torres with a glare that could have melted steel. "Airman," he roared, the sound making Torres jump. "Do you have any earthly idea who you are speaking to?" He didn't wait for an answer that would never come. He gestured to the historian, Dr. Albright. "If you would." The historian stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he swiped his tablet. "George Patton," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a formal citation. "Enlisted in the Army Air Forces in 1943. Assigned to the 357th Fighter Group, the Yoxford Boys. He flew 140 combat missions in the European Theater of Operations, flying this very aircraft, P-51 Mustang, serial number 4472123, which he christened Valiant Lady." A collective, barely audible gasp went through the assembled airmen and mechanics. Torres's face had gone from cocky to confused, to utterly, devastatingly pale. The historian continued, his voice growing stronger. "He is credited with 22 confirmed aerial victories, making him a triple ace. His commendations include the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Distinguished Flying Cross with a silver cluster, and the Congressional Medal of Honor." The last 4 words fell into the silence like anvils. Medal of Honor. The highest, most sacred award. The airman looked at George not as an old man but as a creature from a legend. The Medal of Honor was awarded for his actions on December 24, 1944, Dr. Albright read, his voice thick with emotion. "During the siege of Bastogne, then Captain Patton, flying alone after his squadron was scattered, engaged a formation of 12 German Junkers, 88 bombers targeting the entrenched and besieged 101st Airborne Division. Despite critical damage to his aircraft and a severe shrapnel wound to his leg, he single-handedly broke up their bombing run, downing 4 of the bombers and scattering the rest, before nursing his crippled aircraft back to Allied lines. His actions are directly credited with saving the lives of hundreds of American soldiers on the ground that day." The story hung in the air, immense and humbling. The power dynamic in the hangar had not just been inverted, it had been annihilated. Colonel Davis lowered his salute, but his eyes remained fixed on Torres. "Inside Mr. Patton's wallet," he said, his voice dangerously low, "which I believe you are still holding, you will find his original hand-engraved combat pilot wings. They were pinned on his uniform by General Jimmy Doolittle himself. Trembling, Torres looked down at the wallet in his hand as if it were radioactive. Colonel Davis took a step toward the young airman, his shadow falling over him. "You are a disgrace to that uniform," he seethed. "To this Air Force. To everything those wings on your chest are supposed to represent. You look at this man and you see an inconvenience. You see a target for your pathetic schoolyard jokes. I see the man who flew through hell itself to guarantee the very freedom you take for granted every single day you wake up." He turned to the Chief Master Sergeant who was standing by with a notepad. "Chief, I want their names. All 3 of them. They will be reporting to my office at 0600 tomorrow morning for a personal, and I assure you, very intense lesson in Air Force heritage. They will start by writing a 10,000-word essay on the history of the 357th Fighter Group. Then we'll see if they are fit to continue wearing this uniform." The airmen, led by Torres, began to stammer, their words a pathetic jumble of "sir" and "sorry." George held up a hand. The gesture was small, but it commanded the attention of everyone in the room. He looked at Torres, and in his eyes there was no anger. There was no triumph. There was only a deep, weary sadness that was somehow more damning than the colonel's rage. "Son," George said, his voice raspy but carrying clearly in the stilled hangar. "This plane," he patted the cool metal of Valiant Lady's fuselage, "she isn't just a machine. She's not just metal and paint and wire. She's a promise. She's a promise that boys my age, terrified and thousands of miles from home, made to other boys who were dying on the ground. We didn't fight for parades. We didn't do it for the medals." He looked from Torres to the other young men. "We did it for each other. Respect isn't about saluting a uniform or fearing a rank. It's about understanding the promises that were kept so you could be standing here, safe, in this hangar today." The colonel, his expression softening slightly, gently took the wallet from Torres's nerveless fingers and handed it back to its rightful owner. George took it, his fingers tracing the cracked leather. He opened it and looked down at the tarnished silver wings nestled in their hidden pocket. The world dissolved again, not into violence, but into a quiet, profound memory. He was 20 years old again, lying on a cot in a muddy field hospital. His leg throbbed. The air smelled of antiseptic and damp earth. A figure stood over him, a man with stars on his collar. General Doolittle. The general's hand was on his shoulder, warm and steady. "You saved a lot of lives today, son." The general's voice echoed in his mind. "A lot of boys are going home to their families because of you. Don't ever forget why you fight." The memory wasn't about the glory of the moment, but the weight of it, the responsibility, the promise. The fallout was swift and decisive. The next morning, Torres and his 2 friends found themselves not in the colonel's office, but in a sterile classroom with Dr. Albright for the first of many long lessons on military history and heritage. Colonel Davis, true to his word, mandated a new base-wide training program focused on the contributions and sacrifices of previous generations, with the story of George Patton and Valiant Lady as its opening chapter. A formal letter of apology, signed by the colonel himself, was posted on every bulletin board on the base. A week passed. The buzz about the incident in Hangar 4 slowly faded into the rhythm of daily operations. One evening, Torres, off-duty and in civilian clothes, found himself walking past the hangars. He saw that the main door to Bay 4 was partially open, a warm yellow light spilling out onto the tarmac. He hesitated, his heart pounding. Then he took a breath and walked inside. George was there, just as before, quietly polishing a section of the Mustang's wing. He didn't seem to notice Torres at first. The young man stood in the shadows for a long moment, wrestling with his shame. Finally, he found his voice. "Sir," he said, the words small in the vast space. George stopped his work and turned. He looked at Torres, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant bully from the week before, but a humbled young man, his eyes full of a remorse that was deep and genuine. "Sir," Torres began again, his voice cracking, I was hoping, could you tell me about her? About Valiant Lady?" George Patton held his gaze for a long moment. Then a small, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth, the first one Torres had ever seen. It transformed his face, chasing away some of the weariness. He gestured with his rag toward an old wooden crate sitting nearby. "Pull up a crate, son," George said, patting the gleaming silver wing of his old warhorse. "Let me tell you about the time her engine coughed its last breath over the Ardennes. The courage of heroes like George Patton should never be forgotten. If you were moved by his story, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more incredible stories of service and sacrifice.